La 9534e séance du Conseil de sécurité reprend. Je donne maintenant la parole au représentant de la Mauritanie.
Thank you, President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member state of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as a chair of OIC Group. Allow me at the outset to welcome and congratulate the newly elected non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for the term 24-25, looking forward to jointly working with this august UN organ for meaningful action to strengthen and maintain international peace and security and to ensure respect for the values and the resolution of the United Nations. Our appreciation goes to non-permanent member states who have successfully completed their term. We extend our heartfelt congratulations to the newly elected member with the special recognition for Algeria, Guyana, and Sierra Leone, the esteemed member of our organization. May their upcoming tenure be marked by the success and fruitful accomplishment. Mr. President, this meeting is convened once again to address the grave situation unfolding in the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in the Gaza Strip, due to the ongoing Israeli brutal aggression against the Palestinian people for the past 109 days, and which has resulted so far in the loss of thousands of innocent lives, tens of thousands of injured, civilian destruction of vital civilian infrastructure, and forced displacement for the majority of population in Gaza Strip, in blatant violation of international humanitarian law and relevant UN resolution. The atrocity being committed by Israeli occupied forces akin to genocide act are reminiscent of the darkest scene and memory in human history, such as the ethnic cleansing and acting that amount to genocide witnessed during the Palestinian 1984 catastrophic Nakba. The deliberate and indiscriminate killing and maiming of about 100,000 of innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, is a testament that the genocide intent behind this act. The wanton destruction of residential buildings, schools, hospital, and UNRWA facility further underscores the systematic Israeli persistent in eradicating the Palestinian people, national, ethnic, and religious identity. This required indeed immediate attention and intervention of this esteemed body. In the same vein, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, firmly rejects any attempt to alter the democratic composition of Gaza Strip through forced displacement. The suffering endured by the Palestinian population, with about 90% of the population have been displaced and faced with the constant threat of death, in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, amount to a war crime. In addition, Israelis' obstruction of aid workers and the denial of essential supplies such as food, water, electricity, medicine, and shelter exacerbate the humanitarian crisis and constitute heinous crime that demand urgent intervention on humanitarian, legal, and political front. Mr. President, the escalating Israeli aggression, violence, and incursion in the West Bank, coupled with the settler attacks against Palestinian civilians, exacerbate their suffering and pose a grave risk of further deterioration of peace and stability in the region and beyond. Reports show that since 7 October 2023, about 350 Palestinian civilians have been killed and 5,800 injustified detained. This international community must strongly condemn this human rights violation, put an end to these criminal acts, and hold those responsible accountable for their crimes. Furthermore, the OIC draw attention to the disturbing report of abuse, ill treatment, collective punishment, torture, and violence perpetrated against Palestinian detained. The plight of more than 11,000 Palestinian detained included 5,800 who were arrested since 7 October 2023, and the death of 7 prisoners within Israeli jails, demand independent investigation into this violation and require enforcement of international humanitarian law, particularly the 4th Geneva Convention, in order to protect the human rights of Palestinian detainees in compliance with the role of international humanitarian law. In addition to the Israeli assault on dozens of mosques and churches in Gaza Strip, illegal Israeli action violating the sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque continue unabated. Report shows that more than 50,000 Israeli settlers stormed into Al-Aqsa Mosque in 2023 under the protection of Israeli forces, while illegal acts of suppressing, assaulting, terrorizing, and banning Muslim worshippers from reaching Al-Aqsa Mosque were strictly imposed in blatant violation of the right to freedom of religion and belief under international humanitarian law. Mr. President, the OIC deeply regrets that the fact this august body has so far failed to adopt needed international resolution toward the protection of Palestinian civilians as the primary UN body tasked with protection, global peace, security, and justice. The Security Council must do more to enforce its own resolution, prevent further crimes of aggression, and acts that amount to genocide, and ensure Israeli respect for and compliance with its obligation under international law. In response to this current heinous and unprecedented Israeli aggression against Palestinian civilians, a joint Arab and Islamic summit took place on 11 November 2023 in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This meeting adopted a resolution demanding an immediate cessation of Israeli military aggression, lifting of the Israeli siege, delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, and compelling Israel, the occupying power, to abide by international law. Mr. President, we call for an immediate and decisive action by this august body to halt the ongoing brutal Israeli aggression and impunity, and assure accountability for Israel, the occupying power, for its crime against humanity and illegal blockade on Gaza Strip. This included the need to provide international protection for Palestinian people and open humanitarian corridors, allow vital supply for medicine, food, and basic necessity to reach Gaza Strip. In closing, the OIC stressed that security and stability in Palestine could only be achieved through the implementation of international resolution that would lead to ending the Israeli colonial occupation and enabling the Palestinian people to achieve their legitimate right to return to self-determination. This is in addition to the realization of sovereign and independent state of Palestine over all the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. With East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the vision of two-state solution, the relevant UN resolution, and the Arab Peace Initiative. I thank you for your kind attention.
Je remercie le représentant de la Mauritanie de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de Cuba.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
suscribimos la declaración de
we endorse
Namibia
the
en
statement
nombre del
delivered by
presidente del
Namibia on
Comité
behalf of the
para el
chair of
ejercicio
the
de los
Committee on the
derechos
Exercise of
inalienables
the
del pueblo
Inalienable Rights of the
palestino.
Palestinian people.
Es hora de detener el genocidio de
It's
Israel
time to
contra el
stop
pueblo
Israel's
palestino.
genocide against the Palestinian
Reiteramos
people.
nuestra demanda
We reiterate
inequívoca a
our
un cese al
unequivocal
fuego
demand for an
inmediato
immediate
y a poner
ceasefire
fin a la
and an
retórica
end
belicista.
to the belligerent
Es
rhetoric.
esencial la movilización urgente de
The
ayuda
urgent
humanitaria de
mobilization of
emergencia
emergency
bajo la
humanitarian
coordinación
aid
de
under
las
UN
Naciones
coordination
Unidas
is
para atender
essential
la
to
catastrófica
address the
situación en
catastrophic
Gaza.
situation in
La
Gaza.
cumbre del Movimiento de Países No Alineados y la Cumbre Sur,
The summit of
celebradas
non-aligned
recientemente en
movement
Kampala,
and the
Uganda,
South-South summit
se
held
pronunciaron
recently in Kampala
inequívocamente en ese sentido.
unequivocally stated the very
Demandamos
same.
al gobierno de los
We
Estados
demand
Unidos
that the
que
United
deje de
States
paralizar
government
al
stop
Consejo de Seguridad
paralyzing
de la
the
ONU.
United Nations Security
Este órgano
Council.
debe cumplir su
This
mandato
body must
cuanto
fulfill
antes
its mandate
para
as soon
detener
as
el
possible
castigo
to
colectivo
stop the
que lleva a
collective
cabo
punishment
Israel,
being
la
carried out
potencia
by
ocupante,
Israel,
contra
the
la población
occupying power,
palestina
against the
y poner fin a
Palestinian
la escalada de
population,
violencia y la
and put
masacre
an
en
end
Gaza.
to the escalating violence
La
and
historia
massacre
exigirá
in Gaza.
responsabilidad al gobierno de los Estados
History
Unidos
will hold
por
the
su
United States
reiterado
government
veto
accountable for
cómplice
its
que
repeated
garantiza la
complicit
impunidad
veto,
de los
which
crímenes
guarantees
de guerra y
impunity
de
for
lesa
war crimes
humanidad
and crimes against
cometidos
humanity
por la potencia
committed by the
ocupante.
occupying power.
Señor presidente,
Mr. President,
las causas raigales del conflicto
the
israelí-palestino,
root
que
causes
no
of the
comenzó el
Israeli-Palestinian
pasado 7 de
conflict, which
octubre de
did not begin
2023,
on October 7,
deben atenderse sin
2023,
dilación.
must be addressed
Urge que
without
este
delay.
Consejo de Seguridad
It is urgent
haga
that this
cumplir
Security
sus propias
Council
resoluciones
enforce
para
its
poner
own
fin a la
resolutions
ocupación
to
israelí
end the
del
Israeli
territorio
occupation
palestino,
of Palestinian
incluida
territory,
Jerusalén Oriental.
including East
Este
Jerusalem.
órgano no puede permanecer inerte frente
This
a la
body
ilegal
cannot remain
política
inert
de
in the face
anexión
of
de Israel,
Israel's illegal
todas sus
annexation
prácticas
policy,
colonizadoras
all
y
of
su
its
sistema de
colonizing
apartheid,
practices, and
que
its
han
apartheid
persistido
system,
durante
which have
más de 7
persisted for more than
décadas
7
en los
decades in the
territorios
occupied
palestinos ocupados,
Palestinian
en
territory,
flagrante
in
violación
flagrant
de los
violation of
propósitos
the
y
purposes
principios de
and
la Carta de las
principles
Naciones
of the
Unidas
United
y
Nations
el derecho
Charter and
internacional.
international law.
Nada puede justificar tales
Nothing
acciones.
can justify such
Es
actions.
impostergable una solución amplia, justa
A
y duradera al conflicto
comprehensive, just,
israelí-palestino
and lasting solution
sobre
to
la
the
base de la creación de
Israeli-Palestinian
dos
conflict
estados
based on
que
the creation
permita
of
al
two
pueblo
states which would
palestino
allow the Palestinian
ejercer
people
su derecho
to
a la
exercise
libre
their right to
determinación y a
self-determination
disponer
and to have
de
an
un estado
independent and sovereign
independiente
state
y
within
soberano dentro de
pre-1967
las
borders,
fronteras
with
anteriores
East
a
Jerusalem as its capital,
1967,
and which would
con
also
Jerusalén
guarantee the right of
Oriental como
return
su
of
capital
refugees,
y que garantice
can
igualmente el derecho
wait
al
no
retorno de
longer.
los refugiados. Consideramos imprescindible
We
convocar
consider it
de forma
essential
urgente
to
una conferencia de paz
convene as a matter of
bajo los
urgency a
auspicios de
peace
Naciones
conference
Unidas
under the auspices
que
of the
permita
United Nations
preservar
in
los
order to
derechos
preserve the
inalienables
inalienable
del
rights of
pueblo
the
palestino.
Palestinian people.
No puede seguirse relegando el ingreso del Estado de
The
Palestina
admission of the State of
como miembro
Palestine as a
pleno de las
fully
Naciones
fledged member of
Unidas.
the United Nations
Señor
can
presidente,
be delayed no longer.
reafirmamos la voluntad de Cuba
Mr.
de
President, we
contribuir a los
reaffirm
esfuerzos
Cuba's willingness to
internacionales
contribute
legítimos
to
para
legitimate
poner fin
international
a la actual
efforts to put an
situación.
end to the current
Apoyamos
situation.
la demanda de
We
Sudáfrica
support
ante
South
la Corte
Africa's case
Internacional
before
de
the International
Justicia
Court
contra
of
Israel
Justice against
en
Israel
relación con las
in relation
violaciones
to that
por
country's
parte de ese país de
violations
sus
of its
obligaciones
obligations
en virtud de la Convención
under the Convention
sobre la
on the
prevención
Prevention
y
and
sanción
Punishment
del delito de
of the crime of
genocidio, de
genocide,
la cual Cuba es Estado
to which
parte.
Cuba is a state party.
Reiteramos la propuesta presentada por nuestro país
We
en
reiterate
la
the proposal
reciente
presented by our country
19ª
at
Cumbre
the
del
recent
Movimiento de Países No
19th Summit
Alineados
of the
de enviar
Non-Aligned Movement
urgentemente a la
to
Franja de
send
Gaza
urgently
una
an
misión de protección
international protection
internacional
mission to the Gaza
autorizada
Strip.
por la Asamblea General de la ONU
This mission
con
should
el
be
mandato
authorized by
de
the United
garantizar la
Nations General
seguridad y
Assembly and
protección de
mandated
la
to ensure
población
the safety
civil
and
y
protection of the
facilitar la
civilian
entrega de
population
ayuda
and facilitate
humanitaria
the
de
delivery of
emergencia,
emergency
incluyendo
humanitarian aid,
agua y
including
alimentos.
water and food.
Condenamos enérgicamente la matanza
We
sin
roundly condemn the
precedentes de miembros
unprecedented
del
killing
personal
of staff of
del
the
Organismo
United
de Obras
Nations
Públicas y
Relief
Socorro
and
de las
Works
Naciones
Agency for
Unidas
Palestine
para los
refugees
refugiados de Palestina en el
in the Near East,
cercano Oriente, conocidas por sus siglas en inglés de
known
UNRWA,
as UNRWA,
y de los refugiados acogidos bajo la
and the
bandera de la
killing
ONU.
of refugees being
Continuaremos
sheltered under the
apoyando la
UN flag.
extraordinaria labor
We
humanitaria
will
del
continue to
organismo.
support the extraordinary
En correspondencia
humanitarian
con
work of
esta
that
posición,
agency.
llamamos a
In line with
observar
this
la
position,
resolución
we call for compliance with Resolution
78-251 presentada por
78/251
nuestra
presented
delegación
by our
en nombre del
delegation
Grupo de los
on behalf of
77
the
y
Group
China
of
en
77
la
in
Quinta
China
Comisión de la
to the
Asamblea
Fifth
General,
Committee of the
que fue
General
apoyada
Assembly,
por la amplia
which
mayoría
was
de los
supported by the
Estados
vast
miembros.
majority of member states.
Señor presidente,
Mr.
la solución
President,
del conflicto israelí-palestino
resolving the
contribuirá a la
Israeli-Palestinian
estabilidad y la
conflict
paz
will
en
contribute
toda la
to
región del Medio Oriente.
the
A
stability
ese
and peace
noble
of the entire
propósito
Middle East region.
también tributaría el fin de otros desmanes
an
de
end
Israel
to
en la
other
región,
Israeli abuses in the
apoyado por
region,
los Estados
supported by the
Unidos.
United States, but also
Exigimos
contribute
la
to this
retirada
noble goal.
total e incondicional de
We
Israel
demand the
del Golán
total and
sirio
unconditional
y de
withdrawal
todos
of
los
Israel
territorios
from
árabes
the Syrian
ocupados.
Golan and all
Deben cesar las
occupied Arab
agresiones contra
territories.
Siria, que
Aggressions
violan su
against
soberanía
Syria,
e
which
integridad
violate
territorial,
its
y
sovereignty
la
and
injerencia
territorial
externa en esa
integrity
hermana
and
nación
external
árabe.
interference in that sister
Apoyamos la
Arab
búsqueda
nation must
de una
cease.
solución
We
pacífica y
support the
negociada
search
a
for
la
a
situación que se
peaceful
le ha
and
impuesto.
negotiated solution to the
Condenamos los
situation
ataques
imposed on
militares
it.
de Estados
We
Unidos y
condemn the
sus
military
aliados de la
attacks by
OTAN
the
en
United
Yemen,
States and its
en
NATO
violación del
allies
derecho
in Yemen in
internacional.
violation of
Actos
international
de esta
law.
naturaleza
Acts of this nature
alientan la
encourage
expansión
the
de la
spread
guerra
of war
y el genocidio en
and
la Franja de
genocide in the
Gaza.
Gaza Strip.
La solución de los conflictos del Oriente Medio no será alcanzada a través de la violencia.
Violence is not the solution to the
Reiteramos
conflicts in the Middle
nuestra
East.
enérgica condena al
We
atentado
reiterate our strong
terrorista
condemnation
perpetrado en
of the
Kermán
terrorist attack
durante la
perpetrated in
ceremonia de
Kerman
conmemoración del
during the
cuarto
ceremony
aniversario
commemorating the fourth
del
anniversary
asesinato
of the
del
assassination
general
of
Qasem
General
Soleimani.
Qasem Soleimani.
Expresamos nuestra solidaridad con
We
el
express
pueblo
our
y
solidarity
gobierno
with the
iraníes.
Iranian people and
Lleguen
government.
nuestras sentidas condolencias
Our
a los
heartfelt
familiares de las
condolences go to the
víctimas.
families of the victims.
Demandamos el fin inmediato
We demand
y
an
sin
immediate and
condicionamientos
unconditional end
de las
to the
arbitrarias
arbitrary
e ilegales
and
medidas
illegal
coercitivas
unilateral
unilaterales
coercive measures
impuestas
imposed
por Estados
by the
Unidos
United
contra
States
naciones
against
soberanas
sovereign
en el
nations
Medio
in the
Oriente.
Middle East.
Cesen los dobles raseros, la selectividad
Let us
y
stop
la
the double
manipulación
standard,
política
selectivity
que
and
vulneran la
political
causa de la paz y
manipulation
la
that
seguridad
undermine the cause of
internacionales.
international
El
peace and
Consejo de
security.
Seguridad debe ponerse al
The
servicio
Security
de los
Council
pueblos
must
de
put
las Naciones
itself at the
Unidas
service of the
y no
peoples
de
of the United
intereses
Nations
espurios
and not
de
of
la
the
maquinaria
spurious
de guerra.
interests of the war
Muchas
machine.
gracias.
Thank you very much.
Je remercie le représentant de
thank
Cuba
the
de ses
representative of
déclarations et je
Cuba
donne à
for
présent
the
la
statement,
parole au
and I now give the
représentant
floor to
du
the
Brésil.
representative of Brazil.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je
Thank
félicite
you,
la
Mr.
France
President.
pour
I
l'organisation de ce
congratulate France
débat
on
de haut
having
niveau
convened this
qui a de
high-level
nouveau attiré
debate, which once
l'attention
again
de la
has
communauté des
drawn the
Nations Unies.
international community's attention.
Mr. President, it has been decades since the present item in the Council's agenda was first considered. There is a need to go beyond wishful declarations and engage in dialogue and compromises that translate into action. As never before, there is a need for real diplomacy and true political will that enable effective multilateral action. The Middle East peace process has long been stalled, not by itself, but by deliberate actions from different sides. Now we are witnessing the cruelest war, one that seriously threatens the prospect of a peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. Let me repeat what Brazil has been urging this Council to achieve for far too long: an immediate ceasefire in Gaza before nothing else is left to be saved. That is the urgent call from the international community, translated in powerful General Assembly resolutions passed in the face of Security Council inaction. Its implementation is long overdue. As stated by the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs earlier this month, what has been unfolding in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory is a war with almost no regard for the impact on civilians. A ceasefire is necessary to protect civilians not only from indiscriminate or disproportionate military assaults, but also from death by hunger and disease. The feasibility of humanitarian action and life-saving assistance in Gaza, as determined by United Nations Security Council resolutions 2712 and 2720, depends on it. Regrettably, alongside with relentless large-scale military operations, undue restrictions and delays to the entry of humanitarian aid in Gaza reported by UN agencies compound the hardship of civilians, in blatant disregard for international humanitarian law. The provisional measures requested by South Africa to the International Court of Justice with the aim of preventing the risk of genocide by requiring, quote, the immediate suspension of military operations in and against Gaza, unquote, are most urgent and needed. The requested pronouncement by the principal judicial body of the United Nations not only may enable the necessary humanitarian relief and save civilian lives, but it can also contribute to creating an environment conducive to the restoration of political dialogue and to the resumption of negotiations aimed at the two-state solution. Mr. President, a call for a ceasefire in Gaza does not tackle the root causes of the conflict, as is necessary for durable peace in the region. Nevertheless, a ceasefire now is possibly the only alternative that can preserve the international community's ability to do so thereafter. There can be no military solution to the deeply rooted causes of tension and hostility. Further military action will only deepen resentments, hatred, and ultimately perpetuate the cycle of violence with detrimental effects for the whole region and the world. Beyond Gaza, in the West Bank, in the Red Sea, in Yemen, across the blue line between Israel and Lebanon, in Syria, and of course also in Israel, the escalation of hostilities and new security incidents seem directly related to this growing sentiment of distrust and outright disregard for international law, prompted by our collective inability to avoid the tragedy in Gaza, ensure accountability, and pave the way for a true and effective peace process. There is no alternative other than advancing decisively towards the two-state solution, with a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security within mutually agreed and internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant du Brésil de sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Irak.
شكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس. يضم وفد بلادي صوته إلى البياني المجموعة العربية والمجموعة الإسلامية. في البداية أود أن أتقدم بالتهنئة إلى جمهورية فرنسا على توليها رئاسة مجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر، ونعرب عن شكرنا لجهودها المبذولة في تيسير عقد هذه الجلسة الاستثنائية، كما تقدم بخالص التهنئة للأعضاء الجدد المنتخبين في هذا المجلس: الجزائر، جمهورية كوريا، سيراليون، غويانا وسلوفينيا، وتوليهم مقعدهم في المجلس للفترة من 2024 إلى 2025. وتمنياتنا لهم بالتوفيق والنجاح في إداء مهامهم. كما أرحب بمشاركة أصحاب المعالي الوزراء في هذه الجلسة لما تحظى به من أهمية وقيمة مضافة في ظل استمرار العدوان الإسرائيلي الممنهج على الشعب الفلسطيني. ونشكر الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة على إحاطته التي قدمها. السيد الرئيس، منذ أن ارتكبت قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي عدوانها في أكتوبر 2023 ضد أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني في قطاع غزة واستخدامها شتى أنواع الأسلحة والقصف العشوائي برا وجوا وبحرا، والتي راح ضحيتها الآلاف من الأطفال والنساء والشيوخ، وتدمير البنى التحتية والمدارس والمستشفيات ودور العبادة والمساكن، وكذلك قطع إمدادات الماء والطاقة وغلق المحابر الحدودية وفرض الحصار والعقوبات الجماعية والتهجير القسري. لم يتمكن مجلس الأمن من ممارسة مسؤولياته القانونية في حفظ السلم والأمن ولعدة مرات، وإيقاف هذه المجازر والإبادة الجماعية التي ترتكبها قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، الأمر الذي أدى إلى تفاقم الوضع الإنساني وحدوث كارثة إنسانية حقيقية، كما وصفها الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة بأنها حالة غير مسبوقة بسبب كثافة العمليات العسكرية والتي ستؤدي إلى تبعات ونتائج تؤثر على السلم والأمن الإقليمي والدولي. أغتنم هذه الفرصة لأثمن دور الأمم المتحدة ووكالاتها الإنسانية التي أوفت بولايتها بتواجدها وموظفيها في الميدان، وما قدموه من مساعدات واستمرارهم بعملهم الإنساني في الظروف الصعبة رغم فقدان أرواح زملائهم موظفي الأمم المتحدة، ورغم تجاهل القوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لنداءاتهم لوقف إطلاق النار وإيقاف الكوارث الإنسانية وإنقاذ الأرواح. لقد عكست غالبية الدول الأعضاء إرادتها وصوتها ومواقفها من خلال رعايتها وتصويتها لصالح قراري الدورتين الاستثنائيتين للجمعية العامة لوقف إطلاق النار وإنقاذ الأرواح وإيقاف المآسي الإنسانية اليومية التي لا يمكن وصفها بأي كلمات لحجم خطورتها وفظاعتها. وأملنا كبير بالاستجابة إلى مطالب غالبية أعضاء الأمم المتحدة وعدم تجاهلها والحفاظ على كرامة الشعب الفلسطيني وحقه في العيش بحرية واتخاذ تدابير لمحاسبة الكيان الإسرائيلي على جرائمه الوحشية. السيد الرئيس، يدرك العراق أن الأزمات في الشرق الأوسط مترابطة مع بعضها البعض، وأن التطورات الأخيرة في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة ستؤدي إلى تداعيات وخيمة على منطقة الشرق الأوسط. إذ أطلق العراق ومنذ بداية العدوان والحرب الظالمة التي شنتها قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على قطاع غزة العديد من التحذيرات من أن مغبة الاستمرار بدعم الكيان الغاصب وعدم تحمل المجتمع الدولي وتحديدا مجلس الأمن مسؤولياته سيؤدي إلى انزلاق الأمور نحو تطورات شاملة لن تقف عند حدود غزة والأراضي الفلسطينية، مما يجعل خطر الحرب وانتشار العنف محيطا بالمنطقة كلها، ومع التجاهل التام لدعوات إيقاف الحرب التي جرى التأكيد عليها من قبل العديد من قادة العالم والأمين العام للأمم المتحدة. كان السلوك العدواني للاحتلال مستمرا ويلقى المساعدة والمساندة من قبل عدد من الدول، ونرى أن توسيع دائرة الاستهداف لا يمثل حلا للمشكلة، وأن ما سيدفع لاتساع نطاق الحرب، بل أن الحل يكمن في أن يمارس مجلس الأمن الدولي مسؤولياته وأن يصدر قراراً يوقف فيه الحرب العدوانية الوحشية ضد الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة. السيد الرئيس، تعرب حكومة جمهورية العراق عن دعمها الكامل وتقديرها للسيد الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة لموقفه المبدئي المتضمن في رسالته الموجهة إلى المجلس إزاء ما يحدث من انتهاكات صارخة في قطاع غزة، ويؤكد العراق أن الكوارث الإنسانية التي حصلت بسبب هذا العدوان أدت إلى مأساة إنسانية تستدعي تدخلا دوليا عاجلا لوقفها وضرورة تكاتف جميع الجهود الدولية والشعور بالمسؤولية من أجل عدم توسيع رقة الحرب وتطور الأحداث وامتدادها إلى ما لا تحمد عقباه. وإن ما حصل في قطاع غزة يوم 7 تشرين أول لا يمكن فصله عن التراكمات التي جاءت نتيجة لاغتصاب الحقوق المشروعة والانتهاكات المستمرة من قبل قوات الاحتلال في الأراضي الفلسطينية وحملات الاعتقال والاستيلاء على الأراضي وانتهاك المقدسات التي امتدت أكثر من 7 عقود. ونعيد التأكيد على أنه في ظل هذه الظروف والتصعيد لا يمكن أن تتحول القضية الفلسطينية من قضية أرض محتلة وشعب مضطهد ومسلوب حريته واختزالها إلى قضية نزوح ومساعدات إنسانية فقط. وعليه آن الأوان أن يتخذ المجتمع الدولي تدابير فعلية لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وهذه المعاناة المستمرة، كما نجدد دعوتنا للمجتمع الدولي بما يملي الشعور بالمسؤولية والتضامن الإنساني بمطالبة الكيان الإسرائيلي القائم بالاحتلال بوقف عدوانه المستمر ضد أبناء شعب فلسطين والامتثال إلى القرارات الدولية، ويعرب العراق عن دعمه وتأييده للدعوة القضائية التي تقدمت بها جنوب أفريقيا ضد الكيان الإسرائيلي أمام محكمة العدل الدولية بسبب ارتكابه جرائم إبادة جماعية، واعتبارها خطوة مهمة نحو وقف إطلاق النار والمحاسبة وتحقيق العدالة وإنهاء الاحتلال وتبعاته. يتطلع العراق أن تؤدي السيدة سكرت كاخ وطاقمها دورا مضافا واستثنائيا في الميدان بمتابعة إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية بشكل موسع وآمن ودون عوائق والاطلاع بمسؤولياتها، وندعو إلى تقديم التسهيلات اللازمة لتمكينها من أداء مهامها تنفيذا لقرار مجلس الأمن 2720 وإنشاء آلية مراقبة تابعة للأمم المتحدة لتسهيل ومراقبة دخول المساعدات الإنسانية إلى الأراضي الفلسطينية. السيد الرئيس، سارعت حكومة جمهورية العراق ومنذ بداية العدوان الإسرائيلي إلى إرسال المساعدات الإنسانية والغذائية والمستلزمات الطبية إلى الشعب الفلسطيني في قطاع غزة عبر مطار العريش في جمهورية مصر الشقيقة، وجرى تسليم تلك المواد من قبل جمعية الهلال الأحمر العراقي إلى نظيره المصري ومرافقة الهلال الأحمر الفلسطيني كما أرسلت حكومة العراق ناقلات وقود إلى جمهورية مصر محملة بزيت الغاز لغرض إيصالها إلى القطاع. وختاما السيد الرئيس، نجدد موقف حكومة وشعب العراق بمساندة الشعب الفلسطيني وبما يقرره من تحقيق تطلعاته وحقه في تقرير المصير وإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية على أرض فلسطين.
Palestinian state on Palestinian territories. I thank you.
Le représentant de l'Irak pour sa longue intervention et je passe la parole à la représentante du Portugal.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci aussi pour l'organisation de ce débat. Unfortunately, since the last open debate on the situation in the Middle East, the violence is spreading across the region. Hostages are still being held captive by Hamas. The suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza is unprecedented. The territory is becoming unlivable, and the anger is on the rise, laying down the foundations for future waves of youth being radicalized among both Israelis and Palestinians. Once again, Portugal would like to reiterate its unequivocal condemnation of the terrorist attacks by Hamas, reaffirm its solidarity with Israel and its right to self-defense. We demand the unconditional release of all hostages and the direct access to the International Committee of the Red Cross to the remaining captives. Terrorism is not admissible in any circumstances. At the same time, we continue to witness a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, and we must be vocal in rejecting the normalization of the suffering of the Palestinian people. After more than 100 days of war, there is no place for waging war against an entire population. Collective punishment of civilian population is contrary to international humanitarian law, and preventing further loss of life is a pressing priority. We have just heard the staggering numbers the Secretary General brought us here yesterday. This level of destruction is unprecedented, and the civilian population in Gaza is defenseless, both against Hamas and Israel. Furthermore, the basic tenets of international humanitarian law are not compatible with constraints to the necessary flow of food, water, electricity, and fuel to Gaza. We are deeply alarmed by the risk of having even more Palestinians dying from hunger and disease than the ones that have already died under the bombings. We need immediate implementation of UN Security Council resolutions 2720 and 2712. Rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded, and sustained humanitarian access to Gaza must take place now. This implies the urgent need for creating the conditions for a permanent ceasefire. We maintain the view that our collective priority should be the protection of civilians and addressing the humanitarian situation on the ground. Accordingly, Portugal contributed with 10 million euros for humanitarian relief of the Palestinians, as announced at the humanitarian conference held in Paris last November. That contribution reflects our position towards this conflict. We stand on the side of humanity. Therefore, we reiterate our support to Secretary General Antonio Guterres' calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We commend the extraordinary commitment of the UN workers on the ground, and we reject any attempt to undermine the UN credibility and authority. Political narratives play a decisive role in shaping public opinions. Hence, we condemn any statement or message that implies the relocation of Palestinians, and we condemn the widespread violence of radical settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Not holding these acts accountable is inconsistent with the rule of law. Finally, we must do all we can to prevent a spillover of this conflict across the region. Therefore, we call for more actions conducive to de-escalate the situation in south of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and the Red Sea. We call as well for maximum restraint. It is time to bring back the diplomatic track. Mr. President, we must address the structural drivers of this conflict. We must bring hope in the future for the Palestinian people and meet the security concerns of Israel. This must be done through a new impetus to the peace process, building, among others, on the Arab Peace Initiative. And this requires trust and will to engage in meaningful negotiations. We know what we aim for, peace in the region based on a two-state solution. This is the only way forward. Let us now lay down the conditions to achieve that goal. I thank you.
Je remercie la
I
représentante
thank
du
the representative
Portugal
of
pour sa
Portugal for their
déclaration et je donne à
statement. I
présent
now
la
give the
parole à la
floor to the
représentante de
representative of St.
Sainte-Lucie.
Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have the honor to deliver this intervention on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. Allow me to extend our appreciation to the Secretary General, Guterres, for his remarks at yesterday's open debate. Mr. President, CARICOM is deeply concerned over the unrelenting hostilities in the Gaza Strip, which threaten an already delicate region and breeds fear, mistrust, and disillusionment about the possibility of a two-state solution as provided for in Security Council Resolution 242. The statistics are stark. Since October 7th, over 23,000 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, with over 85% of the population being displaced, some multiple times. Although the situation is grim, CARICOM maintains hope that where there is a convergence of strong political will and unity, a solution can be achieved. However, a precondition to this is the implementation of an immediate ceasefire. Without it, the resulting death and devastation wrought in the Gaza Strip would further delay the possibility for peaceful coexistence. To this end, we reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire that would facilitate the parties' return to the negotiating table, a necessary step in building trust. We further underscore that the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages would also operate as a confidence-building mechanism. Alongside efforts towards a ceasefire is the need for permanent, unhindered, and unconditional passage of humanitarian aid at levels commensurate with the overwhelming needs. This is the only way to assuage the symptoms of a conflict, the brunt of which is borne by innocent civilians. Within this context, CARICOM takes this opportunity to recognize the commitment made by the United Nations, including the UN Relief Agency and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, as well as humanitarian partners working in these hazardous conditions. We underscore that even conflicts have rules to which all parties are equally bound. We therefore call on both sides to comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, particularly as it pertains to the conduct of hostilities, protection of civilians and civilian objects, humanitarian access, and the protection of humanitarian personnel and their freedom of movement. In this vein, we also call on all parties to respect their obligations enshrined within the resolutions adopted by the Security Council, including resolutions 2720 and 2712. Mr. President, as we conclude, we appeal to the members of the Security Council to work constructively to ensure that Gaza, already described by the Secretary General as a graveyard for children, does not descend into a charnel house. Discord need not preclude durable solutions. We trust that the Council would prioritize the needs and well-being of the civilians to positively impact the situation so that both sides could work towards the vision outlined in Resolution 242, which remains the cornerstone of peace in the region. To this end, CARICOM reiterates its unwavering commitment to Resolution 242, emphasizing that both Palestinians and Israelis deserve to exist side by side in peace and within secure and recognized borders. Mr. President, on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de Saint-Lucie de cette déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Bangladesh.
Mr. President, I thank the French presidency for organizing this important debate. I also thank the Secretary General for his comprehensive briefing. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC group. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is staggering, with over 25,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 66,000 injured since October 7, 2023. Heartbreakingly, an alarming 70% of those killed are women and children. 1.9 million people have been displaced, forced from their homes as a result of widespread destruction. The toll extends beyond mere numbers. It represents the shattered families, broken lives, and a community grappling with unimaginable losses and pains. Relentless Israeli bombardment spared nothing: hospitals, schools, religious sites, all demolished. The loss of 153 UNRWA personnel is not just a statistic. It marks the highest number of casualties among UN personnel in its history. It serves as yet another stark example of indiscriminate brutality by Israel. And the aggression, killings, and genocide by Israel have been continuing unabated. Regrettably, we must acknowledge one more time that we, the United Nations, especially this Council, have miserably fallen short in preventing the indiscriminate bombing in Gaza and the tragic loss of civilian lives. Adding to the tragedy, Palestinians are now facing critical shortage of basic necessities like food, water, and medicine, and our efforts to ensure vital humanitarian assistance have proven insufficient. Life of the civilians are being used as weapons of war, and it continues. Even after securing the support from the two-thirds majority of the General Assembly for an immediate ceasefire, we have failed, as all the efforts have been blocked in this Security Council through the use of veto power, disregarding the will of international community. Mr. President, Israel must be held accountable for its flagrant violations of international norms and principles, international human rights and humanitarian laws, as well as other obligations prescribed in the relevant UN resolutions. In this regard, we commend South Africa for seeking provisional measures for the International Court of Justice. Bangladesh stands in full support of South Africa's initiative and urge every member state to do the same. Moreover, support to the ongoing investigation by the International Criminal Court is also critical. Palestine issue has reached its catastrophic stage due to the culture of impunity being enjoyed by Israel for decades. It is more urgent than ever to hold Israel accountable for its genocidal act and aggressions. Mr. President, we urge for rapid, safe, unhindered, expanded, and sustained humanitarian access in Gaza to ensure necessary life-saving assistance. We refer to the Security Council Resolution 2720 and welcome the appointment of Ms. Sigrid Kaag as Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. We urge the Council to implement this resolution and other resolutions of the Security Council regarding Palestine. Mr. President, we once again urge this Council to take immediate measures to stop the Israeli attack in Gaza without delay, and also to bring an end of decades-long Israeli occupation and aggression against Palestine. In this regard, we would like to repeat that the only solution of this crisis, the only way to establish peace in Palestine and the whole region, is to establish an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital under a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. In this connection, we wish to express our full support to Palestine's full membership of the United Nations at the earliest. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Bangladesh de sa déclaration et je passe à présent la parole au représentant de la République arabe syrienne.
سيد الرئيس، بداية ينضم وفدي إلى البيان الذي أدلى به المندوب الدائم لمملكة البحرين الشقيقة باسم المجموعة العربية، ويود أن يدلي بالبيان التالي بصفته الوطنية. إن التطورات الأخيرة التي تشهدها منطقة الشرق الأوسط في ضوء العدوان الإسرائيلي الوحشي المستمر على الشعب الفلسطيني منذ أكثر من 100 يوم واعتداءاته المتكررة على الأراضي السورية هي حلقة في سلسلة الإجرام الإسرائيلي الذي يعود إلى ما يزيد عن 75 عاما. ويعكس النزعة المتأصلة لدى الكيان الإسرائيلي للإجرام والتدمير، حيث استشهد أكثر من 25,000 من أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني جلهم من النساء والأطفال، ودمر أكثر من 80% من المنازل في شمال ووسط قطاع غزة بهدف تهجير ما تبقى من الفلسطينيين من أرضهم وتصفية القضية الفلسطينية. كما تستمر قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في حصارها اللا إنساني لقطاع غزة ومنع إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية واستخدام الأسلحة المحرمة دوليا بما في ذلك القنابل الفسفورية الحارقة والتلويح باستخدام القنبلة الذرية، مرتكبة بذلك مختلف صنوف جرائم الحرب والجرائم ضد الإنسانية بما في ذلك جريمة الإبادة الجماعية، ضاربة بعرض الحائط كافة القوانين الدولية والمبادئ.
And this is in a manner that is in flagrant contempt of international principles and international law. Mr. President, it is outrageous that the United States and some European countries have been attempting to legitimize, to legalize the Israeli aggression against Gaza by placing it under the banner of legitimate defense and by thereby making the execution of the victims the silence of the U.S. and allies in the light of Israel comes against the Palestinian people and the obstacles that they have erected to prevent the Security Council from delivering upon its mandate and ending the crimes. These are all factors which shed light on the false allegations of those states who claim to seek to uphold human rights, and they also unmask the lies circulating around my country, Syria, for years. And here I wish to ask those who, for all of these years, have turned a blind eye to the litany of these crimes against the civilians, the delivery of humanitarian assistance and guarantee of non-impunity. Could you have the same principles in upholding and protecting Palestinian people against the Israeli war machine? What of accountability for Israel? How is it possible for the Israeli army not to be held accountable for its crimes against the Palestinian people? My country calls upon the Security Council to adopt effective and immediate measures to end the suffering endured by the Palestinian people, to end Israeli persistent attacks, and to deliver humanitarian urgent support, and to prevent the forced displacement of people, and to guarantee that Israel and sponsors be held accountable for its acts, and for them to no longer be able to operate in complete impunity. In this regard, our country welcomes the step of South Africa against Israel vis-a-vis the ICC in light of the grave violation of the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the crime of genocide. Mr. President, as part of the same policy of aggression, in the same vein, this policy pursued by Israeli authorities against occupied Arab territory since the occupation of the Golan since 1977, there have been heinous violations of international law as well as international humanitarian law. This includes attempts, inter alia, to change the demographic composition and institutional structure of the Syrian-occupied Golan with the establishment and erection of additional settlements and increasing the number of settlers and the compensation of lands to carry out projects and this including wind turbines. This is an attempt to impose Israeli nationality on the people there. And this is also compounded by the plunder of natural resources and the persistent closure since 2014 of the Konetra crossing, which is the
الحيوية بما في ذلك الموانئ والمطارات المدنية مما يعرض أرواح المدنيين وسلامة الطيران المدني للخطر ويعيق عمليات الأمم المتحدة الإنسانية. وكان آخرها العدوان الذي استهدف صباح يوم السبت 20 كانون الثاني الجاري مبنى سكني في أحد أحياء العاصمة دمشق. إن الاعتداءات المتكررة على أراضي الجمهورية العربية السورية والتهديدات التي لم تتوقف ضد دول المنطقة تظهر حقيقة أهداف الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الذي يريد التوسع في المنطقة على حساب الحقوق العربية في فلسطين وغيرها من الأراضي المحتلة. إن الجمهورية العربية السورية استحذر إسرائيل ورعاتها مرة أخرى من مغبة الاستمرار في هذه السياسات العدوانية التي تنذر بإشعال المنطقة وتدفعها نحو تصعيد شامل يهدد السلم والأمن الإقليمي والدولي وطالب مجلس الأمن بتحمل مسؤولياته في وضع حد للنهج العدواني والعمل بصورة عاجلة لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي العربية وتطبيق قرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة وفي مقدمتها قراري مجلس الأمن 242 والقرار 497 الذي اعتبر قرار إسرائيل بضم الجولان باطلا ولاغيا ولا أثر قانوني له.
338 as well as Resolution 497 which considered the decision of Israel to annex the Golan as null and invalid with no legal validity. To conclude, Mr. President, I wish to emphasize that the European Union delegation has exploited this council to raise issues related to the situation in Syria. This has nothing to do with the theme of today's meeting. This is an attempt to divert attention from the crimes being perpetrated by Israel in the region and the misguided policies of the European Union, which have continued to fan the flames of the crisis in Syria and to worsen the suffering of our people. Nonetheless, given the magnitude of the tragedy in Palestine and in respect for the Council, my country will reserve the right to respond and will respond in a later meeting. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Cambodia.
Mr. President, Excellency, distinguished delegate, first may I express my appreciation to you, Mr. President, for convening today's debate under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. It has been more than 100 days since the conflict began on October 7, 2023, resulting in thousands of civilian casualties and enormous destruction in Gaza. It is very unfortunate to see that the war is still going on. Without a ceasefire, many more innocent lives will be lost, not only to gunfire, but also to a lack of treatment for the injured and sick, disease, and food shortage. Mr. President, when one decides something very badly, one should not be shy in talking the same again and again. So allow me to reiterate my delegation view as follows. First, while welcoming the 4 resolutions, 2 adopted by the Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly and 2 adopted by the Security Council, Cambodia called on all relevant parties to the conflict to implement this resolution to save people's lives, prevent the spillover in the region, and achieve a ceasefire. Second, to allow the 2 nations to live in harmony, it is of utmost importance to seek and address the root cause of the Palestine-Israel conflict. Cambodia urged all parties to exercise utmost restraint, constructively engage in dialogue, and resolve conflict through diplomacy and peaceful means to end the humanitarian crisis and achieve enduring peace. Recently, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Mr. Secretary General Guterres repeated a valid view about the urgent need to build trust to get the 2-state solution moving forward. Third, the life and safety of all civilians must be protected from harm in conflict. Therefore, my delegation urged all sides not to target civilian and civilian infrastructure and to cease fire in order to allow humanitarian access for the delivery of essential aid to those in need under international humanitarian law. To conclude, Mr. President, Cambodia would like to join others in calling for the unconditional release of all hostages. I thank you for your attention.
Je remercie le représentant du Cambodge de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Irlande.
Thank you, President. Ireland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union delivered yesterday. Today's debate comes over 100 days since the beginning of this war. The situation on the ground in Gaza is becoming increasingly desperate. The level of civilian deaths is wholly unacceptable. The amount of humanitarian aid and supplies reaching civilians in Gaza is wholly inadequate. As stated by the Secretary-General yesterday, the entire population of Gaza is enduring destruction at a scale and speed without parallel in recent history. The adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2720 was a step in the right direction, but it did not go far enough. It is now manifestly clear that the situation on the ground demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We therefore urge this Security Council to call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in line with the overwhelming view of the international community. Ireland thanks the Secretary-General for his frank assessment of the situation given yesterday. In so doing, we'd also like to acknowledge and thank those UN staff who are working on the front line in Gaza. We also express our heartfelt condolences to the families of those who have been killed. Ireland is shocked that a sustained campaign of disinformation and delegitimization is directed towards UN organisations, particularly UNRWA, as well as the ICRC. It is vital that this campaign ceases and that Israel instead moves to foster a more constructive relationship with these organisations. President, Ireland has consistently condemned the attacks launched by Hamas on and since the 7th of October. The rape and murder of civilians, destruction of civilian property, taking of hostages, use of human shields and firing of indiscriminate rockets at urban centres are serious violations of international humanitarian law, for which those involved must be held responsible. We have called for and continue to call for all hostages to be released immediately and unconditionally. However, it is equally beholden upon all of us to recall that international law limits the use of force in self-defence to no more than is necessary and proportionate. No more. Ireland's view is that these limits are being exceeded, as illustrated by the unacceptable death toll and the massive destruction of property, including homes throughout Gaza, the displacement of up to 2 million people, and the ensuing humanitarian catastrophe to which we have referred. Furthermore, international humanitarian law requires that in any armed conflict, military operations must respect the principles of distinction, proportionality and precaution. Ireland is increasingly concerned that the use of heavy munitions with a wide blast area cannot be limited to military objectives located in heavily populated urban centres and is therefore indiscriminate. Their use in these circumstances unavoidably leads to the extensive destruction of nearby civilian property and loss of civilian life. The use of these munitions must stop and must stop now. President, Ireland reiterates that we must take concrete steps to achieve long-term peace, stability and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike and for the region as a whole. This can only be done through a sustained and serious commitment to a two-state solution. And this requires genuine political will. The rejection by Prime Minister Netanyahu of the perspective for a sovereign Palestinian state is not acceptable. In February of last year, the UN Security Council reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to the vision of the two-state solution where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognised borders consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. As I say, the UN Security Council reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to this vision. Today, the achievement of this vision is more pressing than ever. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Irlande de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant des Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank France, President of the Council for the month of January, for convening this important open debate on the Middle East. I also wish to congratulate and welcome the newly elected members on the Council, Algeria, South Korea, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia. It is heartening to see Guyana, a fellow small island developing state on the Council, I have no doubt that you will continue to champion the interests of citizens on the Council, including a close examination of the security dimension of climate change that the world is going through at the moment. The Security Council has failed. That is a fact that even the P5 should acknowledge. And its failure is most clearly seen in Israel's ongoing war of aggression in the occupied Palestine, most recently since 7th October 2023. What is most astonishing is that the Council, which is responsible for maintaining global peace and security, is refusing to call for a ceasefire. With that refusal, it is perpetuating a potentially genocidal war by the most powerful military in the Middle East against Palestinians. Over a month has now passed since the adoption of the resolution 2720, the second such Security Council resolution since the beginning of the war. The resolution was viewed as the first step towards peace and supported by many countries, including the Maldives. Over the course of the month, we have not seen a cessation of hostilities. We have not seen an end to the collective punishment imposed on the Palestinian people. We have not seen the adherence of Israel to international law and international humanitarian law. The Council needs to enforce its resolutions and universally implement its mandate, and we risk losing the faith in the United Nations system as a whole and the weakening of the multilateralism. The Council should send a clear and unmistakable message to the Middle East. The message should say to Israel to immediately and unconditionally accept and implement a ceasefire, open humanitarian corridors, release the prisoners, return to the negotiation table, and pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. The Middle East is encouraged that many powerful supporters of Israel have come out in the recent weeks and called for the establishment of an independent sovereign state of Palestine in the lands currently occupied by Israel. Such calls should also include the fact that lasting peace can only be achieved in the Middle East with the establishment of an independent state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The Maldives welcomed South Africa's application to the International Court of Justice on 29 December 2023, requesting to declare Israel is in breach of 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. An expedited response by the court will undoubtedly enable to take urgent action against all acts and measures that are in breach of international humanitarian and international human rights law. Tension in various parts of the Middle East have also resulted in attacks including massive bombardments and substantive loss of lives. We would like to see a deeper engagement by the UN, especially the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, in promoting dialogue, mediation, and other preventive diplomacy tools. We also like to believe that DPPA and other UN agencies have accumulated a substantial amount of knowledge on conflict resolution and management in the Middle East. We call on the Council members to use such resources, for such knowledge can generate evidence on what policies and tools have worked and what have failed in preventing conflicts and in sustaining peace. That enduring conflict in the Middle East stands as a powerful symbol of the failures of this Council. The Maldives therefore urges the Council to uphold its obligation in maintaining international peace and security. We reiterate our calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and allow immediate and urgently needed humanitarian aid and assistance to the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant des Maldives de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Pologne.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais également vous remercier d'avoir organisé ce débat. Poland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. And I would like to share some comments in my national capacity. Poland reiterates its unwavering commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. We're strongly in favor of a robust coordination of all efforts to restore calm in the region. For this purpose, Poland will remain actively engaged in various diplomatic fora. Although the key role here is for the regional partners, we support all processes that have a potential to contribute to achieving a diplomatic solution and to improve the situation of civilian populations. In the longer term, we firmly back a viable two-state solution based on internationally agreed parameters. Mr. President, applauding the initiatives of Malta and the United Arab Emirates, we welcome the Security Council's Resolution 2712 and 2720 and call for their swift and full implementation. We extend our gratitude to all humanitarian actors, particularly UNRWA, which persist in delivering life-saving assistance to the civilians affected by the situation on the ground. Saying that, we strongly underline the need for all aid to be distributed solely by UN agencies in order to prevent its misuse by terrorist organizations. Mr. President, from the very beginning, Polish authorities at all levels have condemned Hamas' brutal attacks in the strongest possible terms. The use of innocent civilians as human shields is particularly repulsive. We consistently call for the release of all hostages without any preconditions. We are of the opinion that Israel, just like any other state, has the right to defend itself in the face of terror. Nevertheless, we emphasize that the right to self-defense must be exercised in full compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. We strongly advocate for immediate relief to Gaza's civilian population through increased humanitarian effort. The extremely tragic situation of Gazans must be alleviated without delay. Therefore, we have increased our humanitarian aid to the Strip. Poland doubled its financial contribution to the UNRWA and provided additional funding for UNICEF and WFP operations in Gaza. Mr. President, we have been following with concern the security situation in southern Lebanon and the ongoing skirmishes between Hezbollah and IDF. In this context, we reiterate our strong support for unified actions aimed at preventing a regional spillover of the Gaza conflict. We need to encourage all sides to find a diplomatic solution that will allow for the Lebanese and Israeli to return to their homes in the areas close to the border. Now, with regard to Houthi attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, Poland deems these actions totally unacceptable. There is no doubt that Houthi attacks pose a threat to global trade operations and increase the risk of regional escalation. Therefore, we hope that the recent Security Council Resolution 2722 will contribute to our common goal to de-escalate tensions and restore stability in the Red Sea area. Mr. President, to conclude, preventing a regional spillover and restoring calm in the Middle East is now more urgent than ever before. We believe that ending the hostilities in Gaza would facilitate the process of reaching a diplomatic solution to the situation in the region. We believe that the UN community should be able to develop a common position on this extremely important issue. Otherwise, the escalation and spreading of the conflict may have further devastating and long-lasting consequences. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie le représentant de la Pologne de sa déclaration. Et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de la Colombie.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Como nación comprometida con la promoción de la paz y el respeto por los derechos humanos, Colombia se ha venido uniendo a la mayoría de los Estados miembros de esta organización para exigir un cese inmediato de hostilidades que permita poner fin a la violencia y la barbarie que vienen en espiral desde comienzos de octubre en el Medio Oriente y que no ha cesado a la fecha. La escalada de violencia que hemos presenciado por más de 100 días en el Oriente Medio pone en riesgo inminente el mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad en dicha región. La gran mayoría de los que han muerto son mujeres y niños, lo cual es absolutamente inaceptable. Nuestra experiencia nacional nos ha mostrado que la violencia solo produce más violencia y más pérdida de vidas, dejando a su paso un legado nefasto para las sociedades, en especial las juventudes y las generaciones futuras. Colombia expresa su solidaridad con todas las víctimas y sus familias. Nada justifica los ataques a blancos civiles ni la toma de rehenes civiles. Nada justifica la muerte y las lesiones de civiles, de mujeres y niños indefensos, de periodistas ni del personal de la Agencia de Naciones Unidas para la Población Refugiada de Palestina en Oriente Próximo. En palabras del secretario general, desde el 7 de octubre de 2023 han fallecido 152 miembros del personal de las Naciones Unidas en Gaza, la cifra más alta de pérdida de vidas en la historia de la organización, que es desconcertante y desoladora. Vemos con preocupación la escasez de agua, alimentación y de refugio en Gaza, al igual que el desplazamiento de un alto porcentaje de su población. Es inadmisible que sean forzados a dejar sus hogares para transitar a áreas congestionadas y limitadas. Reiteramos que la comunidad internacional está obligada a condenar de manera contundente las graves violaciones al derecho internacional humanitario que se están presentando y que han afectado de forma desproporcionada a mujeres, niñas y niños y otros grupos vulnerables. La ausencia de una respuesta al conflicto entre Israel y Palestina genera consecuencias deplorables para la población civil, desestabiliza la región y cuestiona el sentido mismo de la vida y de la humanidad. Por ello, reafirmamos nuestro respaldo a una salida pacífica, definitiva e integral a la cuestión palestina, fundamentada en la solución de dos estados que convivan uno junto al otro, dentro de fronteras seguras e internacionalmente reconocidas de conformidad con lo establecido en las resoluciones relevantes de la Asamblea General y del Consejo de Seguridad, respetando los derechos humanos y el derecho internacional humanitario. El Gobierno de Colombia saluda la demanda presentada por Sudáfrica contra Israel en la Corte Internacional de Justicia en La Haya por la violación de varias disposiciones de la Convención de 1948 contra el genocidio. Colombia continuará haciendo un seguimiento cuidadoso de este proceso y, de ser necesario, anunciaría en su debido momento las acciones judiciales concretas que adelantaría como pasos adicionales a la demanda de Sudáfrica. Señor presidente, Colombia reconoce y agradece los esfuerzos de diferentes países por detener la violencia. Exhortamos a la Organización de Naciones Unidas y a sus Estados miembros a redoblarlos para obtener un cese inmediato de hostilidades, garantizar el acceso de ayuda humanitaria a los territorios afectados por el conflicto, garantizar la liberación inmediata de todos los rehenes y desescalar la violencia que se ha generado en el Oriente Medio. Muchas gracias.
Je remercie la représentante de la Colombie de cette déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Saint-Siège.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. President, Pope Francis, in his recent address to members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, expressed once again his deep concern about the ongoing war. He reiterated the condemnation of the 7th of October terrorist attack against the Israeli people, in which a large number of innocent persons, including women and children, were horribly wounded, tortured, and murdered, and many taken hostage. The Pope clearly stated, "I renew my condemnation of this act and of every instance of terrorism and extremism. This is not the way to resolve disputes between peoples, and once again call for the immediate liberation of all hostages held in Gaza." At the same time, Pope Francis renewed his appeal for a ceasefire on every front, including Lebanon, which would allow space for dialogue, however difficult it may be, in order to secure the release of the hostages still being held in Gaza and to facilitate the distribution of much-needed humanitarian aid. Indeed, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is of extreme gravity, affecting innocent civilians and causing unimaginable suffering, with more than 20,000 people killed and nearly 2 million people displaced. As the Holy See has already stated in its Council, it is essential to avoid an entire population paying the consequences of a heinous act of terrorism. Furthermore, any action taken in self-defense must be guided by the principle of distinction and proportionality and comply with international humanitarian law. It is deplorable that hospitals, schools, and places of worship, all of which are the last resort for those fleeing the violence in Gaza, are being used for military purposes and consequently attacked. Such military activity by all parties must cease, and these sites must be guaranteed the protection according to them under international humanitarian law. Pope Francis has therefore called for a greater effort on the part of the international community to defend and implement humanitarian law, which seems to be the only way to ensure the defense of human dignity in situations of warfare. Mr. President, in Israel and in Palestine, as in every other part of the world, every human being, be they Christian, Jewish, Muslim, of any people or religion, is sacred, precious in the eyes of God, and has the right to live in peace. The most viable solution for achieving lasting peace remains the two-state solution, with internationally guaranteed special status of the city of Jerusalem. It is vital that the international community, together with the leaders of the State of Palestine and the State of Israel, pursue such a solution with renewed determination at a time of widespread despair and hostility, so that humanity may prevail over hardness of heart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Saint-Siège de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole à la représentante de l'Argentine.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Argentina sigue con extrema preocupación el desarrollo de la actual crisis en Gaza. Argentina expresa su más enérgica condena al accionar terrorista de Hamas, que está en la raíz de la tragedia humanitaria que describe el secretario general, y lamenta que, hasta la fecha, esto no haya sido objeto de una condena explícita por parte del Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Al respecto, Argentina reconoce el derecho de Israel a ejercer su legítima defensa en el marco del derecho internacional y del derecho internacional humanitario. Argentina lamenta profundamente el alto costo que el conflicto se está cobrando en términos de víctimas civiles, incluyendo niños, mujeres y ancianos, así como la destrucción de infraestructura civil básica, según dan cuenta los informes de las Naciones Unidas y el Comité Internacional de la Cruz Roja, y expresa sus condolencias a las familias de las víctimas civiles de todas las nacionalidades que han perdido la vida a consecuencia del actual conflicto armado. Argentina siempre ha creído que deben hacerse los mayores esfuerzos para proteger la vida de civiles inocentes. Es por ello que Argentina pide que se cumpla sin dilación con lo decidido por la resolución 2720 del Consejo de Seguridad para que se adopten medidas urgentes para permitir de inmediato un mayor acceso humanitario seguro y sin trabas y crear las condiciones que lleven al cese sostenible de las hostilidades, es decir, al cese del fuego. De acuerdo con la citada resolución, la Argentina exige la liberación inmediata e incondicional de todos los rehenes secuestrados a partir del repudiable acto terrorista perpetrado por Hamas el pasado 7 de octubre y que aún continúan en cautiverio, entre ellos nacionales de mi país, de Argentina, que se encuentran sufriendo en carne propia las consecuencias de ello. Al respecto, Argentina manifiesta una vez más su compromiso con una paz justa y definitiva al conflicto palestino-israelí de conformidad con el derecho internacional y las resoluciones pertinentes de la Asamblea General y del Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Solo a través de la reanudación de un proceso de diálogo basado en la solución de dos estados, viviendo lado a lado en paz y seguridad dentro de fronteras seguras e internacionalmente reconocidas, será posible lograr una paz duradera. En este sentido, resulta urgente renovar el compromiso de la comunidad internacional para alentar a israelíes y palestinos a que regresen a la mesa de negociaciones con miras a alcanzar una solución pacífica y acordada de este conflicto. Finalmente, mi país agradece al secretario general y a su equipo por los esfuerzos que viene realizando y rinde un sentido homenaje a funcionarios internacionales que con grandes y sobrados sacrificios y esfuerzos se desempeñan hoy en el terreno. Una mención y un reconocimiento especial merecen aquellos miembros de las Naciones Unidas que han perdido la vida en el cumplimiento de sus tareas. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Argentine de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant du Chili.
Señor presidente, felicitamos a Francia por convocar a este debate abierto y la conducción que ha ejercido durante su presidencia este mes en este órgano. Agradecemos esta oportunidad porque nos permite reafirmar la importancia que le asignamos a esta materia. En este mismo sentido, tomamos nota de la presentación realizada por el propio secretario general y el resto de los oradores. Chile promueve la solución de los dos estados y el derecho de Israel y Palestina a vivir en armonía dentro de fronteras internacionales seguras y reconocidas y con pleno respeto a los derechos humanos de todos sus habitantes. Por este sentido, hacemos un llamado urgente para dar cabal y pronto cumplimiento a las resoluciones pertinentes que respaldan el derecho del pueblo palestino a constituir un Estado soberano, como son las resoluciones 181 y 242 de la Asamblea General y también aquellas relacionadas como la resolución 234 del propio Consejo de Seguridad, donde se reafirma que el establecimiento de asentamientos por parte de Israel en el territorio palestino ocupado, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, no tiene validez legal y constituye una flagrante violación del derecho internacional. Señor presidente, indudablemente los actos terroristas perpetrados por Hamas el 7 de octubre pasado y la respuesta indiscriminada del Estado de Israel sobre la población civil que habita en la Franja de Gaza y que también ha afectado a Cisjordania, infringen el respeto de la Carta de la ONU, el derecho internacional y el derecho internacional humanitario. Junto a lo anterior, nos alarman las repercusiones de este conflicto en el resto de la región. Hemos observado eventos que son de profunda preocupación. Por esto, hacemos eco del llamado del secretario general y los respectivos jefes de distintas agencias de la ONU, entre estas la UNRWA, la OMS, el PMA y la UNICEF, que un cese al fuego inmediato, duradero y pleno es esencial para disminuir las tensiones. Un alto al fuego sigue siendo prioritario para la protección de civiles, particularmente mujeres, ancianos y niños. No cabe duda que la vida humana debe ser nuestra máxima prioridad y hasta el momento este Consejo de Seguridad no ha logrado controlar. Subrayamos que no existe contradicción alguna entre la legítima defensa de un Estado o el combate al terrorismo y respetar la vida de los civiles. Simplemente no está permitido atacar la infraestructura civil crítica, incluyendo viviendas, centros sanitarios y educativos y refugios, entre otros. Manifestamos que se debe garantizar el acceso pleno, inmediato, seguro, sin trabas y sostenido de la ayuda humanitaria, lo que incluye respetar las resoluciones 2712 y 2720 adoptadas el año pasado por este órgano. Consideramos que se debe facilitar el uso de todas las rutas disponibles para ingresar y a través de toda la Franja de Gaza. Señor presidente, la violencia no se soluciona con más violencia y su uso indiscriminado ha costado la vida de miles de civiles palestinos y pone en gran riesgo la vida de los ciudadanos israelíes secuestrados, como trágicamente ya ha quedado demostrado. Chile ha condenado sin matices las acciones de Hamas, al igual que todo acto terrorista, hechos de violencia y hostilidades contra la población civil. Asimismo, exigimos la liberación inmediata y sin condiciones de todos los rehenes aún en manos de Hamas, velando por su bienestar y trato en conformidad al derecho internacional. Alentamos a todas las partes involucradas, así como a la comunidad internacional, a seguir trabajando para terminar esta guerra. Esto solo es posible a través de la vía diplomática y el diálogo. Reconocemos los esfuerzos y resultados que países amigos han logrado para aminorar esta crisis. Le deseamos éxito a la recientemente designada coordinadora humanitaria y de la reconstrucción en Gaza, señora Sigrid Kaag, en las labores a desempeñar y esperamos que reciba todas las facilidades para ejercer sus funciones. Señor Presidente, Chile siempre ha reafirmado como prioridad de su política exterior el contribuir a alcanzar una solución pacífica en el Medio Oriente, expresando constantemente nuestro apoyo a una solución justa y duradera. Nuestro compromiso se relaciona con albergar la comunidad palestina más grande fuera del Medio Oriente, que empezó a llegar a Chile a inicios del siglo XX, integrándose transversalmente en nuestra sociedad. Asimismo, congregamos en nuestro país una dinámica y activa comunidad judía. Al concluir, deseamos compartir que el jueves pasado Chile presentó, en conjunto con México, un escrito de remisión ante la Corte Penal Internacional respecto de la situación palestina, con el objetivo de reforzar la investigación de los presuntos crímenes de guerra y crímenes de lesa humanidad ocurridos en Gaza, Cisjordania, Jerusalén Este e Israel, ilícitos contemplados en el Estatuto de Roma. Considerando que actualmente existe una investigación en curso por parte de la Fiscalía de esta Corte respecto a la situación de Palestina y el objetivo de la remisión de Chile es apoyar al fiscal en su indagación. Para Chile, el esclarecimiento de los hechos y responsabilidades es esencial para que estas situaciones no se vuelvan a repetir. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie le représentant du Chili de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant d'Oman.
سعادة الرئيس، السيدات والسادة المحترمين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يجتمع مجلس الأمن اليوم مرة أخرى بعد أكثر من 100 يوم ولا يزال عاجزا عن اتخاذ تدابير عملية وملموسة لوقف إطلاق النار في قطاع غزة رغم الدعوات الصريحة من قبل المجتمع الدولي ممثلة في الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة وفي مجلس الأمن وفي موقف الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والذي نحييه على دعمه للسلام والقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني. لن ينسى العالم والشعوب المحبة للسلام منح إسرائيل الضوء الأخضر لتتمادى في جرائمها بحق الشعب الفلسطيني. من هنا نقول لإسرائيل وبصوت واحد لا بد من وقف الهولوكوست ضد الشعب الفلسطيني. ونؤكد على أن مشروع الإبادة الجماعية والتطهير العرقي والتهجير القسري مرفوض، ونحمل إسرائيل بوصفها سلطة الاحتلال ومن يساندها في تنفيذ هذه الجريمة المسؤولية الكاملة. هذا العدوان الذي تسبب ويتسبب في إسقاط الشرعية عن مجلس الأمن، هذا المجلس الذي طالما افتخرنا بمنجزاته ودوره في الحفاظ على الأمن والسلم الدوليين. كما نؤكد على أن ما وقع لن يقلل من عزيمة وإصرار الشعب الفلسطيني وسائر شعوب الأرض نحو الحرية ورفض الاحتلال. من هنا نقول وبصوت عالي أن أي احتلال مآله الزوال، وأن ثمن الإنهاء وتصفية الاستعمار غالي مليء بالتضحيات. هذا هو الثمن الباهظ الذي دفعته العديد من شعوب العالم نحو الحرية والكرامة وتحقيق المصير. تشجب بلادي السياسة الإبادية التي تنتهجها إسرائيل ضد الشعب الفلسطيني، فإنها تواصل مناشدتها مجلس الأمن للوقوف أمام مسؤولياته القانونية والأخلاقية لوقف إطلاق النار وحماية الشعب الفلسطيني وتوفير احتياجاته الإنسانية ومحاسبة إسرائيل على انتهاكها للقانون للقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني واستهتارها بقرارات الشرعية الدولية الداعية إلى إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي الفلسطينية والعربية وانسحاب إسرائيل إلى حدود عام 1967 وذلك تحقيقا للعدالة والسلام الشامل والدائم. وشكرا.
Je remercie le représentant d'Oman de sa déclaration et je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Tunisie.
السيد الرئيس، في البداية أود أن نتقدم بالتهنئة لفرنسا لترأسها مجلس الأمن في الشهر الحالي ولعقدها لهذا النقاش الدولي الهام، كما تقدم بالتهنئة لأعضاء جدد المنتخبين في مجلس الأمن. ولا يفوتني أن أختم هذه المناسبة الإعراب عن تقديرنا ودعمنا للمساعي النبيلة التي يبذلها الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة سيد أنطونيو غوتيريش ودعواته المتكررة لوقف إطلاق النار في قطاع غزة. السيد الرئيس،
Mr.
بعد أكثر من 100 يوم
more than 100 days after the outbreak of conflict, the occupying power has continued indefatigably its systematic aggression and its policy of collective punishment and genocide, targeting the fraternal Palestinian people in Gaza by destroying civilian infrastructure to heighten the suffering of the Palestinian people who have been encountering and dealing with a humanitarian disaster due to the ongoing nature of this aggression. We condemn in the firmest terms the war crimes perpetrated by the occupying power against Palestinian civilians who have systematically been killing women, children, decimating entire families, and targeting hospitals, schools, universities, as well as places of worship and even humanitarian personnel. And they use starvation and interaction of basic services as tools of war. We cannot remain silent at a time when the international community is silent and the international bodies are incapable of delivering upon their responsibilities. In this regard, Tunisia emphasizes the fact that the steadfast support to the Palestinian people constitutes a moral and legal responsibility. This is incumbent upon the international community as a whole, and therefore it is of paramount importance to step up international efforts to end the bloodletting, to end the colonization, and to ensure that the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people are achieved. The paralysis of the peace process, the ongoing deterioration of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, these are resulting in the fact that the approach that has been adopted by the international community vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause has remained conditioned on the repeated cycles of violence, and this has prevented the root causes from being dealt with, the root cause being the occupation. This is a reality which further complicates the situation in the region, and this has heightened the suffering of the Palestinian people at a time when people throughout the world are seeking ways to achieve development and economic growth. The Palestinian people continue to suffer under the yoke of occupation and the blockade for more than 75 years. The occupying entity has continued its aggression. Its expansionist project has been, and its flagrant violations of international law in full impunity. Tunisia emphatically denounces the double standards of policies and all attempts to place the executioner and the victim on the same footing, or attempts to liquidate the just Palestinian cause. We call for an immediate ceasefire, reiterate that call for the guarantees for the protection of civilians, for accelerated deliveries of unimpeded humanitarian assistance. We reject all attempts of forced displacement of the Palestinian people outside of their land in a flagrant violation of the principles of international law as well as the resolutions under international law. Mr. President, Tunisia is firmly wedded to the values of justice and of law. Tunisia resolutely rejects any form of pressure and aggression. We reiterate our steadfast position of support for the fraternal Palestinian people in their resistance to the occupation and resistance to the genocide which has been targeted against them, and for the building of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif with its capital. We have spared no effort to help advance the cause of the Palestinian people in their legitimate struggle to achieve their inalienable right and to end colonization. Thank you. I thank Tunisia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Mr. President, the horrific position in Gaza and the West Bank has been described to us in graphic detail in the session that we have heard yesterday and today, would certainly place any other historical conflict known to humankind to be of incomparable intensity in the context of the grotesque manner in which the conflict is being prosecuted by the parties to the conflict, encouraged, of course, by third parties who appear to have little concern for humanity, but simply driven by the greed for global dominance and to satisfy their collateral agendas. We heard the Secretary General yesterday, who told us of the untold suffering and trauma of the Palestinian people and of the family members of the hostages, including those families who lost a family member to the terror of the 7th. Mr. President, it is said that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. My delegation does not intend to add more to this tragic narrative. Instead, we would silently wish and pray that sanity that we humans are said to be blessed with will sooner than later prevail. My delegation would therefore seek to appeal to the higher beings in all of us present here at this Security Council meeting by leaving you with a few lines which I have said before from a verse from Rabbi Sheila Weinberg, a community relations professional, titled Two Peoples, One Land. In her zest for peace in the Middle East, a plea worthy of contemplation, and I think it captures what should be the true ethos if we are to achieve a true and lasting peace. It goes thus: two peoples, one land, three faiths, one root, one earth, one mother, one sky, one beginning, one future, one destiny, one broken heart, one God. We pray, she says, that we be granted a vision of unity. May you, the life of all the worlds, source of all amazing differences, help us to see clearly, guide us gently and firmly towards each other, towards peace. As she puts it, let us all breathe together, breathe life to all that we do to alleviate the suffering of those suffering due to this terrible conflict. Mr. President, in the context of the escalation of aggression in Palestine, it is important that we convey a message to all parties involved in the conflict, that we promote empathy, we promote understanding, and plead for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. We understand that the current situation is tense and filled with pain and suffering. We urge all parties to prioritize dialogue, empathy, and the pursuit of peaceful solutions, that it is critical to recognize the value of human lives and the importance of finding common ground. Mr. President, it is important to note that dialogue and empathy alone may not resolve all aspects of the complex conflict in Palestine. However, they provide a foundation, we say, for peaceful negotiations and create a conducive environment. That violence alone perpetuates a cycle of destruction and hinders progress towards a just and lasting peace. That we encourage all parties to engage in constructive dialogue, listen to each other's concerns, and work towards a negotiated settlement that respects the rights and aspirations of all people involved. Mr. President, we know that trust building is crucial in the dialogue process, as it creates a safe and open environment, fosters understanding, builds confidence in the process, and facilitates cooperation and collaboration and sustains dialogue over time. Without trust, Mr. President, effective and meaningful dialogue becomes challenging, hindering progress towards a peaceful solution. Mr. President, peace cannot be kept by force. I say this again. Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. That our clarion call today is for an immediate ceasefire and for all parties to respect international humanitarian law, ensuring the protection of civilians and the provision of necessary aid and support. It is through dialogue and dialogue alone, understanding and a commitment to peaceful coexistence that we can build a future where all can thrive in dignity and security. Sri Lanka's long-held principled position on this matter has been clear. We recognize the legitimate and inalienable rights of the people of Palestine to statehood. Sri Lanka remains committed to supporting a just and comprehensive negotiated political settlement to the Palestinian issue in line with the relevant UN resolutions leading to two states living side by side based on the 1967 borders. Sri Lanka also, which is the chair of the UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices, and continues to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause and affirms the rights of the Palestinian people to live in peace and dignity alongside their Israeli brothers and sisters. Mr. President, finally, our plea today to our brothers and sisters of Palestine and Israel is that they must come together as members of one human family, put aside their differences, and strive for a future of peace, justice, and prosperity for all in Palestine and in Israel. That the members of this Security Council, as trustees, I remind ourselves, as trustees of global stability and security, and as pledged in the Charter of the United Nations, must do everything possible and must do everything that it takes to facilitate a peaceful resolution of this conflict that we cannot be heard to pass on to future generations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de Sri Lanka de sa déclaration. Il n'y a plus d'oratrice ou d'orateur inscrit sur la liste. La séance est levée.